Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It is July 23rd, and this is our Washington and North Idaho fire weather briefing. We have Valerie in Spokane representing Eastern Washington and North Idaho, and you have Kayla from Seattle representing Western Washington. As always, this meeting is being recorded, and by joining and participating in this session, consent is being given to the recording. Please keep your cameras off per the NOAA Privacy Act statement. Just taking a brief overview of the weather across the Pacific Northwest after pretty heavy isolated heavy showers yesterday in Northeast Washington, North Idaho. We do have some, can't see it in this imagery, but there is some valley fog, a lot of dew across Eastern Washington and North Idaho this morning. And we're in this area of this broad upper level trough that will start making its exit with a flat ridge briefly building across Washington and North Idaho over the next couple of days with a brief warm up. And then as we move into next week, a little more cooler weather, relatively cooler with some showers again, and then warming up again. And I pass it over to Kayla to talk about Western Washington.
Thanks, Valerie. So for Western Washington throughout the remainder of the week, today will be a little bit drier and warmer across the region. And then Thursday will be a little bit warmer. Going into the weekend, we'll get around seasonal average temperatures here. So we'll be dry. We're not really seeing any precipitation in the forecast as of current. And then as we go early into next week, we will see a prolonged warm and dry period, especially on Tuesday. We'll see temperatures just a little touch warmer there. So we'll probably be monitoring that with our fuels being, ready to go. And but yeah, that's pretty much all we have right now. We're not really seeing any fire weather concerns in the short term, but maybe, later on in the week when we get those prolonged warm and dry conditions, we'll continue to monitor that.
Thanks, Kayla. And for Eastern Washington and North Idaho, pretty similar trends. Today we'll start to trend warmer as that flat ridge begins to move into the area and the upper level trough moves out. But we will see some isolated showers primarily across Northeast Washington and North Idaho this afternoon. And then as we get into Thursday and Friday, tomorrow specifically, we'll see a more push of winds through the Cascades Gaps and into the Western Columbia Basin, where elevated fire weather conditions will be present across much of Eastern Washington and North Idaho, but across Central Washington, especially where they didn't see any wetting rains. Might see a couple hours of overlap for critical Thursday afternoon into the early evening, but it does look like as we get into the trends that the minimum RHs will only overlap with the stronger winds for an hour or two potentially, with the strongest winds occurring in the later evening once the RHs start to come up. And then for Friday, kind of similar trend, but does look more marginal with temperatures cooling a bit. And then we're staying pretty dry Saturday into Sunday and Monday, and then messaging a more hot and drier pattern as we get into the middle of next week. Just looking back at the last 24 hours, we did see a handful of showers and thunderstorms across Eastern Washington and North Idaho, and even down into the South Central Washington as well, where there were a handful of isolated to scattered showers that produced almost over a half inch, upwards of an inch of precipitation under the strongest cores. Looking at the numbers, it doesn't look like it'd be all that much, but at our office, we saw about half an inch of rain in about 20 minutes. So there were pretty heavy downpours and some small hail that occurred with these showers, and especially across Northeast Washington and North Idaho. Looking at the lightning, a lot of the lightning was clustered down near the Yakima Reservation and then for South Central Washington, but then as across Eastern Washington and North Idaho, you can see especially zones 101 and zone 701 and 700 were the winners for lightning. These did occur with pretty heavy rain, but if there's any holdovers when we starting to get warm and dry that might be of concern. I'm looking for, this was messaged yesterday, for tomorrow, the hot, dry, and windy conditions. This is in the kind of in the basin near Douglas County. Will peak tomorrow with values in central Washington in about the 75th percentile. There are some members showing hot, dry, windy values in the 90th percentile. And then Friday, see a slight downward trend with peaking on Thursday. And then as we get into the weekend, definitely dropping off a lot with less windier conditions. Just looking a little bit closer in the joint probabilities for elevated to critical weather conditions, fire conditions, it does look like the best chances will be across Douglas County and the Columbia Basin, and then also in the LC Valley area and the foothills, the Lees of the Blues for on Thursday, where there is above a 50% chance for winds greater than 15 miles per hour and RH is less than 20. And then again, for Friday, this probabilities start to go down, although we're still messaging elevated conditions for Friday. Then right now we don't have any products in effect. And then looking for the weather for the next 2 days. Today, we'll see temperatures much warmer than the last 2 days with highs in the 80s and 90s across eastern Washington and North Idaho, and then even down in the west side in the lower valleys of the Seattle metro area and down to southwest Washington as well. Temperatures in the 80s, be quite warm. And then for min RHs, RHs will be a bit higher compared to tomorrow, but lower compared to the last couple of days with RHs in the 20% range across eastern Washington and down in the 30s across western Washington. For day 2, see again a little bit more warming for eastern Washington, cooling for western Washington. And this is where temperatures will be warm, and then we'll start to see that push of onshore flow and start seeing breezier conditions, especially in the Cascade Gaps and in the western Columbia Basin. Looking at the min RHs, our minimum values will be near that marginal range with minimum RHs in the upper teens and low 20s across central Washington and eastern Washington, and then in the 20 to 30% range for North Idaho. And then wanting to show the winds for tomorrow as well. Our sustained winds being the 10 to 20 mile per hour range, especially in the later afternoon and in the evening, with gusts up to 30 miles per hour for tomorrow. I also wanted to go back to today. We are messaging the potential for thunderstorms, 10 to 15% chance of thunderstorms across North Idaho today. And then that drops down to near 0 for tomorrow. So today will be the last day of some isolated to scattered showers across our area. Then looking at trends, pass it over to Kayla.
Thanks, Valerie. Looking at Ohana Prakash here, over the next several days, we'll have pretty good relative humidity recoveries each night. But again, looking at later on in the week, we have Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday during our prolonged warm period there. You can kind of see relative humidity values get a little bit lower into the 30s there, and kind of a little bit more warmer temperatures there. So again, we'll be looking towards that early next week when we have those prolonged warm and dry periods there. But for right now, we're really not seeing any fire weather concerns in the short term, but maybe later on in the week when we have those warm conditions, we'll start to see those relative humidities get a little bit low.
Thanks, Kayla. Wanted to just do a point in central Washington where we are messaging that more elevated to potential the isolated critical conditions for Thursday and Friday. Especially see as we get early Thursday, the winds will be light and then start to pick up later in the afternoon and evening with the minimum RHs peaking in the upper teens to low 20s. So again, there's not very high confidence that the overlap, more critical overlap, will occur with the RHs definitely starting to come up once those stronger westerly winds pick up. And then we can see temperatures generally remaining pretty homogeneous for Saturday into Sunday. And then even on Monday with highs in the low to mid 80s across central Washington. And then we start to warm up later as we get into later next week. And then looking at eastern Washington, Arcadia Orchards, where we do have, I don't know if that's the closest spot to the Lake Spokane fire, but it's kind of, this also just captures North Idaho as well, pretty well. Again, just a brief warm up as we get into for today, tomorrow, and Friday, and generally slight cooling. The maximum RHs will be kind of in the good, fair to good range for RH recoveries, even though those temperatures will be cooling a bit and then start warming up into later next week. Nothing next week wind-wise is currently capturing our attention, but as we get into later in the mid to end of next week, we might start seeing an increase in shower chances and cloud cover, but we will keep monitoring that. Looking at the 8 to 14 temperature and precipitation outlook, Western Washington and parts of Central Washington, CPC is calling for near normal temperatures with leaning to likely above average temperatures for Eastern Washington and North Idaho, and then also remaining in a leaning above average precipitation for all of Washington and North Idaho, especially if we start to see more showery conditions later in the mid to end of next week. And as always, you can do a self-weather briefing at weather.gov/otx/fire dashboard, or if you want to go back and watch recordings from today or any week, any day, you can find it there. I will stop the recording.